now that we got some caffeine going, let's get into it. Pulling up my notes here, I feel like April was actually a really strong month. It felt like the longest month ever because, vlog coming soon, we moved. And I thought that was really going to inhibit how many books I read. But I found that because I was so stressed about the move, I actually seeked books more because it kind of helped me disassociate, go into another reality, and help relieve that stress. I managed to get through 10 books, and one of those being an audiobook, and only DNF'd one book at the very start of the month. I found a few 4 stars and even 2 5-star books this month. So it was definitely better than March, where I was getting through some books that I just didn't like, was kind of forcing myself to read just to have it checked off and done with. The first book I read was the Happy Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez. This was my first Abby Jimenez book, and honestly, we were off to a really good start. I know everyone has been talking about her new release, Just for the Summer. I want to get through some of her backlist before I get into that, especially because I've heard that it's best to read Part of Your World and Yours Truly before reading Just for the Summer. I haven't read either of those, so I want to read those first. And the big haul that I did in March, I had the Happy Ever After playlist within that haul. And this book follows a woman, Salone, who is battling grief after the loss of her fiance. And we find her 2 years later, still not really back to the woman that she was before. Her friends are worried about her, her family's worried about her, her career has taken a toll. You know, she's really going through it. And throughout the story, I liked having such an emotional background for a character, because definitely in rom-coms, a lot of the times you feel like they're just these perfect characters with these perfect lives, and their whole life was meant to be with this other character, and they don't really have that much depth to them. I do feel like she had a lot of depth to her. And actually, on the anniversary of her fiance's death, she's driving to the cemetery to go visit him. This dog, who's stuck in the middle of the road, jumps in her car, and she can't find the owner. She's trying to get in contact with them. She takes it to the vet, cannot get in contact with the owner. About 2 to 3 weeks pass by, and then the owner finally contacts her, and we learn that it's this musician, Jason, who's out of the country and didn't have service. So she's kind of like, screw you, I've been taking care of your dog for 3 weeks, and he's mine now. And so she kind of puts him through you need to prove that you actually love him, or else I'm keeping him. And so that kind of starts them texting, them calling each other, and then over a couple weeks, he finally is back in town and they meet for the first time in person. The story kind of goes from there. You're following Salone healing, learning to love again, and then you follow this musician, Jason, and his kind of rising stardom. And the first 200 pages of this book were phenomenal. Loved it. However, after the first 200 pages, things were really up and down and up and down. It kind of just felt like we were on this roller coaster with a lot of unnecessary twists and turns following this relationship. As well as, I don't know if this is just me, maybe I'm just sensitive to this, but the guy after a while was giving me the ick, because I felt like he was just love bombing her, and it was in a really possessive way. Of half of the reason he wanted to be with her, or for him to be her boyfriend, is so that other guys know she's taken and other guys know that she's his. And I was just like, ew. I feel like the main reason you want to be with someone is because you like them, you love them, you see yourself with them, you want a future with them, not just solely the fact of no other guy can touch her. So I don't know, that was kind of giving me the ick. I don't know if anyone else has felt that way or got that impression from this guy. And then I was reading the back and kind of the author's acknowledgements or notes at the very end of the book. And this is actually the first book she ever wrote. Now, it wasn't the first one that ever got published, but it was the actual first book that she wrote. And in some ways, I could feel that. Some things were a little bit too predictable, and then I felt like there were some aspects of her characters that weren't very consistent throughout. For Salone's whole purpose to be, for the past 2 years, she was so heartbroken and depressed that her life could barely carry on after her fiance's death, and then for her to fall in love with this guy and completely rewrite her life a month into knowing this person, it was a little bit well, I don't think that's actually how it would go. So I don't know. There were some aspects of this book that I absolutely loved, and then some where I was like, this could be better. So I landed on a 4 star. I was happy whenever I read this. I did enjoy it thoroughly, but there were definitely some aspects that could have been improved. I'm gonna need another drink before we get into this one. Okay, so my one DNF of the month was from Rachel Hollis, and it's called Girl Wash Your Face. This book, I was worried whenever I picked this up that this was going to be similar to the book I DNF'd last month from Glennon Doyle called Untamed. Both of them are like self-help / memoir books. And I've learned something about myself. If I'm going to read a memoir or a self-help book, I, 1, need to already know the person and highly respect them. And then 2, they need to have some type of credibility. Something in their life I need to actually be aspiring towards. Otherwise, it is just questionable, like, why am I reading this? What am I seeking to get out of this? Like, do you have any credibility to me? And credibility was a huge thing that came back in my mind while reading this, and just a huge part of why I couldn't get into it. To start off, I can't even put this into words. To start off, the author basically starts with this assumption that I know you think my life is perfect. I know you think I'm so glamorous. I know you think I'm the perfect mom, but I'm here to tell you that I'm not. And at first I was like, I don't have any of those assumptions. I don't think that of you. I don't even know who you are. Someone else bought me this book, so like I have no idea who Rachel Hollis is. And then she goes into, now I'm not perfect because I've peed my pants. I'm sorry, what? She's a mother of 3, and she talks about how she was jumping on the trampoline with her children, trying to show them like her one cool trick, which is like doing the splits, and that she peed her pants. And that's why she's not perfect. And that's why she's here to write this memoir, so that women know we don't need to be perfect. And I was like, you don't have anything deeper than that? Because I'm pretty sure every single woman I've ever talked to who's had a baby, or definitely multiple babies, talked about how your bladder is affected after childbirth. I've literally heard countless women say like, oh yeah, I laugh too hard and I pee. And it's not some taboo topic. Like, women are very open and willing to share that, at least with me. So from the jump, I was like, oh boy, where is this book going? This is the quote that made me put down the book. She says, I'm a living, breathing, flourishing example of someone who chose to rise above the trauma of her past. The premise of that was telling women that you can choose to overcome your trauma. You can choose to be happy. You can choose to be XYZ. And then she said, you know, I'm a flourishing example of why you can choose to do that. And while she does have some trauma in her life and some dark things that happened in her childhood, and I don't think she has the credibility to tell women or others that you can choose to get over whatever happened to you. I sincerely hope that everyone gets over their trauma. I hope that everyone does flourish into their best living self that they can ever achieve. However, just telling someone blanketly in a book, like, you can choose to get over what happened to you, is just so problematic. I'm now going into the weeds. Like, I'm now just going to vent for a little bit. I was so confused about this man she talks about dating whenever she was really naive and like moved to LA whenever she was really young, and there was an age gap between them, like an 8-year age gap. So he was much older. She had never had a boyfriend before. She had never had sex before. You know, she was very naive, and he was controlling the narrative of what a relationship looked like. And the narrative he taught to her was completely 100% taking advantage of her, and basically just formulated that she's a booty call and that's all she is, and she doesn't have the right to question anything or to question her feelings. That was the relationship he taught her. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this guy sounds terrible. Like, that's a terrible situation. And then we find out that that's who she's married to. She married that guy. And I was like, wait, this really toxic, like low-key emotionally abusive man who took advantage of you sexually, like, that's who you married? And you're trying to tell me about how I should have my relationship and what I should ask of men? I was like, oh, no. Had to put it down. had to put it down. I think if you went to 3 months of therapy, you could learn everything she talks about and more in this book. You have like any ounce of self-awareness and have even just begun your self-development journey, I think you're probably going to be on a better track than if you read this. So could not in good faith recommend this to anyone. That is, girl, wash your face. Now, on a much more positive note, I promise I had a lot of good books this month. That one was just like really glaringly stood out to me, and I just really needed to get some warnings out there before anyone would like pick that book up. However, Elin Hilderbrand, The Hotel Nantucket. This was my first Elin Hilderbrand book, and I freaking loved it. This is so entertaining. You follow mostly a middle-aged woman named Lisbeth, and she is kind of starting over in reality. You learn in the first chapter that her boyfriend of about 15 years, they owned a business together, was found cheating on her and had been cheating on her for months. Like any strong woman should, she left him and was like, I'm starting over. I'm leaving the industry that I was in. I know that I'm a very strong, capable woman and I can do whatever I set my mind to. I am starting a new lease on life. That new lease is becoming the general manager for the Hotel Nantucket. Now, the Hotel Nantucket has a very interesting background. 100 years prior, there was a fire where a housemaid got killed in the fire. There's some questionable reasons of why or how she was killed. And then there's stories of how her ghost has haunted the hotel for the last 100 years. The hotel has changed management a lot of times. It was abandoned at certain points. And then this London billionaire, Xavier Darling, buys the hotel property. And his biggest goal is that they're going to receive this 5-key review from this hotel reviewer who's an anonymous lady that has toured hundreds of hotels and has never given a 5-key review. From there, you kind of follow the journey of the hotel getting opened. You follow Lisbeth, you follow the town of Nantucket. Like, the town will actually be a narrator, which is very interesting. You follow the front desk manager, you follow the bellhop, you follow guests. Like, you see so many different points of views, and then you see how like all of these people kind of have slight interweavings beyond just they all work at the same hotel. There are connections beyond that go outside of the hotel, and you kind of see how all of their lives are quietly intermingled. This was so entertaining. This was so good. Elin Hilderbrand has written so many books, and I'm actually so sad. I was researching more about her books after I finished this one, and apparently she's releasing her last book ever this summer called Swan Song. So I'm so sad that, you know, this author that I just found is retiring right as I found her. However, I mean, she's got a big old backlist of books that I can go through. I recently purchased another one of her books that I hope to put on my TBR for next month. I mean, this book, it was so entertaining. When I first finished it, I rated it 4 stars. However, the more I sat with it, I was like, you know what? I enjoyed myself so thoroughly in that book. I'm gonna give it 4.5 because it only left me with the impression that I want to read more of her books. And there's really not much I would change about this. And that is The Hotel Nantucket. Last month, I read the first book in the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy, and I finished books 2 and 3. These books are so easy to get through. So if you wanted, I mean, mindless summer reading, I read each of these in a day, and those were even days that I was working a 10-hour shift. I still managed to read these in a day. Like, you can get through these so quickly. The second book is called It's Not Summer Without You, and this is actually the book I rated the highest in the series. I didn't love the series. The entire premise of the love story I just couldn't really get down with. And when you're reading a romance, if you can't really root for the couple or root for the characters, I mean, like, what are you rooting for? The reason I rated book number 2 the highest is because it's actually the saddest, but it has the most depth to it. If you are sensitive to grief or are sensitive to someone you love having cancer, I wouldn't recommend this series because, I mean, that's solely what book 2 is based on. And I will say, I felt like overall book 1 followed the show pretty closely. Now book 2 was really different in my opinion from the show. I feel like book 2 the show used as like a very loose guide, but they took a lot of creative liberties. So, you know, all of the drama surrounding their aunt in the show doesn't take place at all in this book. Like completely, she's not even a character. The drama is much bigger in the show. It felt like really there wasn't that much drama within this book. The kids were just making the drama and it was actually very easy to be solved. So I did enjoy that we actually got another POV other than Belly, because Belly is not my favorite gal. Like, I'm gonna be real with you, Belly honestly irritates me. So I was glad that we got another POV just to kind of get out of her head, because Belly only really thinks about Belly, and after a while it gets old. And then we go into the third book, We'll Always Have Summer. Now really the whole point of me reading this trilogy is I wanted to read who she ends up with, Jeremiah or Conrad. The timeline for this book is that you follow Belly the summer after her freshman year of college. Her and Jeremiah go to the same college, and then, which is on the East Coast, and then Conrad goes to school on the West Coast. I believe he goes to Stanford, if I remember correctly. So really Conrad's like out of the picture for a lot of it. They have not seen him hardly at all the past year. He is pretty checked out from the family. And then Jeremiah and Belly have gotten closer, obviously, because they're going through college together. Where in book 2, we got some of Jeremiah's perspective, and this one we got some of Conrad's perspective. And obviously the love triangle that has taken place the last 2 books kind of comes to a head within this book. Book 3 is honestly a character assassination against one of these characters. I won't tell you who, but someone gets the short end of the stick in this book. Jenny Han didn't care. She said, we're throwing this one character into the flames. I don't care that this doesn't match their character at all. You can probably guess how I felt about that then with my rating. I have in my notes that I gave this a 2.5 stars, but honestly, I'm gonna change that to a 2 stars because I just don't really know what I liked about this book, if I'm being honest. Belly, truly, I think that she should end up with neither of these guys because she put this family through so much due to her own selfishness. I would be very sad for young girls to read this and to think that Belly is anything to aspire to. Any indication of how you should treat people, your friends, your family, or the ones, you know, you're dating and that you love in that way. It's just not a healthy depiction of how you treat people and how you build relationships. So I'm gonna stick by 2 stars. I will probably unhaul this trilogy. I could have lived my whole life without reading those, but at least now I know how it ends. Now, Jenny Han has said that the books are not an indication of how the show will handle season 3. And I hope they do take some creative liberties because, again, going back to that one specific character assassination, I hope that they choose to depict that character a bit more fairly. But if I was you, if you're over the age of 16, I would probably just stick to the show because I think the show actually does these stories quite a bit better. So that is the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy. On a happier note, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown, 5 stars. This self-help book was phenomenal. Now going back to what I mentioned earlier about credibility, I need someone with credibility or someone that I'm aspiring to. I have previously watched TED Talks by Brene Brown and have absolutely loved them. And then also she has been researching this field for her entire career. And she highly focuses on shame. And that kind of all stemmed into The Gifts of Imperfection. People who tend to be perfectionists, boils down to why you're chasing perfection, typically stems from shame. It can stem from the shame you put on yourself if you're not perfect, or the shame you fear from others if they view you as imperfect. I was previously recommended this book years ago by my therapist, and reading it, it's actually hilarious, and I can see exactly why she recommended this to me, because I wouldn't say proudly, but I am openly a perfectionist, and it's something that I battle with all the time. It has a huge impact for me at work. I felt that going back into school as a kid, you know, putting so much pressure on myself for grades, things like that. And for me, like, my perfectionist stems from the pressure I put on myself. After finishing this, I probably recommended it to 5 people right away, and I already want to reread it. Another beautiful thing about this book is, like, it is so short. It is only, honestly, it's only like 126 pages. I did also like how she broke up the chapters because she breaks them into these guideposts. Some guideposts were more applicable to me than others. Letting go of perfectionism, or letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth. Me. Like, that is me. Letting go of being cool and always in control. Like, those are things that were really impactful to me. Now, some of these, like, didn't hit as hard, of like letting go of numbing and powerlessness, or letting go of scarcity and fear of the dark. I think anyone could pick up on at least 3 or 4 of these guideposts that they could apply to their own lives. Overall, 100% would recommend The Gifts of Imperfection. I would definitely be open to reading more books by Brene Brown. That is The Gifts of Imperfection. Okay, this next one I don't want to go too in the weeds about because I did an entire reading vlog reading this series. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Very, very, very brief overview. You get introduced to our main character, Feyre, who is currently living in the mortal land, and her family is in extreme poverty. One day she goes out hunting in an attempt to find food for them because they haven't eaten in a few days. And while she's hunting for deer, she also comes across a wolf. Now, she kind of has a feeling that this wolf might not be 100% from the human world. She thinks that it could have come across the wall from the fairylands. However, she chooses to not only kill the deer, but also kill the wolf. And you find at the very beginning, this is not a spoiler, but you find out that the wolf was part of the fairyland. And one of the fae from the fairylands comes to collect her, basically in exchange for a life. The wolf that she killed was actually a man, and since she killed that man, her life is being exchanged, and she now has to serve or live in the fairyland for the rest of her life. Very quickly on in the story, she gets taken from her family, and she moves with this fae named Tamlin to the fairyland. And that's probably all that I'll go into for the plot, because one thing I was really happy about is I did not know anything about this book. I tried at first to listen to this book in the audiobook form, and I don't know what it was. How the narrator chose to portray Feyre, it just was very breathy and damsel in distress, which is not how I want my main female character to be. I love strong women. I love women who can solve their own problems. And just how this narrator was depicting Feyre just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So, okay, apologies. Someone knocked on my door and I have no idea where I left off. I think I was talking about how I didn't really love how Feyre was portrayed as just like this very low-key useless woman. What's hard about being stuck in her POV, you'll find, is that she's super ignorant to the fairy world. She has a lot of prejudices that she kind of has to learn from. It's just kind of hard being stuck in a character's head where they are so completely in the dark and everyone else knows way more than her. I found myself getting frustrated with the character at some points. While I wished I knew more information and knew more about the backstory of everything, Sarah J. Maas specifically didn't include that for a reason, so I did have to kind of remind myself of that. I found that the first half of this book was strangely extremely slow. It kind of felt like we were just living the same day over and over again for like 15 chapters. And then the second half of the book, it actually has like a completely different plot. It gets very interesting and very high stakes. I would 100% recommend it. If you wanted super, super detailed thoughts, would recommend my reading vlog. I landed on with my rating for this at a 4 stars. It was very entertaining, the second half of the story. However, there were a lot of things that I found that were predictable. And for instance, with the riddle that we get introduced to, I knew the answer right away. So like for those reasons, I don't think this is like the perfect book. However, if you're new to fantasy, I do think that this is like a good introduction and leads very well into the second book. A Court of Mist and Fury, Akamov. This one was really good. Now, I cannot get into the plot of this. Like, we go on a journey. I mean, where we start off with this story, with what Feyre knows and what Feyre's capable of, and where we end, I ended up rating this 5 stars. I almost gave this 4.5 stars because Feyre, there are a lot of points where Feyre irritates you in this one. Or at least she irritated me. Like, there are a lot of times where she just comes across as like a very moody, ungrateful teenager. A chapter after her moody breakdown, she'll be like, oh, you were right. You know, this person who I just like bit your head off and was really mean to, you were right. I can see why you did that. That's my bad. And that just happened like a few too many times. Why I chose to get over that is there was a huge amount of character growth within Feyre. She does move from like a very moody, low-key, can't help herself teenager to a strong, capable woman. And the plot gets much more intricate in this one. We have like a lot of players, a lot of different courts, a lot of different countries, like all fighting for a position, all the different potential enemies that could be going after them. It was very entertaining. The plot twist that came at the end was really good. I knew a plot twist was going to happen whenever this situation was being built up. However, I thought that something else was going to take place, and then we learned the plot twist that actually happens, and my jaw was like on the floor. I was reading this on the couch with Hunter like right next to me, and I like looked up at him on like 50 pages left of the book, and I was just like, oh, something crazy just happened. I wish that he knew what was going on, because I was trying to explain in very vague terms like how crazy this was. He hasn't read the book. He doesn't understand how crazy it was. The ending of this, like, phenomenal. And I can't wait to pick up book number 3 this month. I think that one's gonna be so good. So that was A Court of Mist and Fury. Okay, next, for a very sweet, cheesy, easy to read rom-com. When in Rome by Sarah Adams. So this book's premise is that we follow a pop star, Amelia, who is just like overworked. The music industry is taking every bit of life that they can out of her and using that to their advantage. And one day she kind of ends up running away, ends up in this small town of Rome, Kentucky. While driving there, her car ends up breaking down in front of this guy's house, who we find out is Noah. And he ends up taking her in, helping her as her car gets repaired. And they're kind of in like this roommate situation for the time being. Noah owns a bakery store within this small town. And we get introduced to Noah and his sisters. The characters that you see in the background are really funny. It's definitely kind of grumpy sunshine. Noah is like begrudgingly helping her, but because he's such a good guy, he's gonna help this pop star. You do get dual POV within this. I liked having access to both characters' thoughts and how they each were feeling in a situation. The only thing that I felt was like a little bit weird about the pacing of the love story in this is that it was kind of insta-love mixed with slow burn. Their feelings for one another, low-key, in my opinion, came out of nowhere. Like, Noah had not even said 5 complete sentences, and they already were like, oh my gosh, like, this girl's gonna wreck my heart, or I know I'm always gonna leave a piece of me in Rome, Kentucky. And I was just like, you guys have hardly had a conversation. But then it's such a slow burn for the romance to actually develop. So it's just like weird insta love of like, I have feelings for you right away, but like, we're gonna take forever to do something about it. Their love story was like largely unbelievable. So for that, I ended up giving it 3.5 stars because it was enjoyable. I think I read it in a day or two. I wasn't fully like bought into the couple and was mainly just reading this for like something cute, sweet, and quick to get through. Okay, last physical book of the month is The 7-Year Slip by Ashely Poston. This is my first book from her. I know that the other book she has out currently is called The Dead Romantics. I do hope to read that. I know that this book overall is rated higher than The Dead Romantics. The 7-Year Slip follows Clementine inherits this apartment that her late aunt has given to her, and the aunt kind of always told her like this apartment is magical. The setting of this book I absolutely loved. It took place in NYC. One day she walks in and she sees a man in her apartment who she's never met before or seen before, and his name is Iwan. And we find out that Iwan is actually 7 years in the past. So this whole 7-year slip element is that the apartment can sometimes go 7 years in the past or 7 years in the future. It sounds like a little bit complicated to understand like how these things slip. Only the apartment is magical and only the apartment moves. So as soon as she steps out of the apartment, it goes back to present day. The author does do like a good job of describing it, and it's not like too complicated to understand like how this apartment slips in and out of the past. At the end of this book, the author actually writes how her aunt and kind of how Clementine idolizes her aunt in a way is actually based off of her own feelings of her grandfather that passed away. And once I read that the aunt was actually based on someone real, it made me love the aunt even more and the relationship between Clementine and her. So this book checked a lot of boxes for me, like emotional depth there, romance there, setting NYC there, the magical realism element there. So there was so many good things about this book. I landed on a 4.5 stars because it didn't give me that 5-star feeling, but it was super enjoyable. I found that the third act conflict, I felt like it was an actual worthwhile discussion over why they were having this conflict. It was resolved quickly, but a lot of the times with romances, the third act conflict is what loses me because it just feels completely unnecessary. So that is The 7-Year Slip. The final book that I read this month was Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. Now I actually listened to this book because it's Meryl Streep that narrates it, and holy shit, this book was so good. Oh, this book I've been telling people to read. Even though it's fiction, it feels like a memoir. Meryl Streep is narrating this mother talking to her 3 girls, and she's narrating brief career as an actress in Hollywood and the various plays she did, and how she met and dated for a brief amount of time this very famous actor Peter Duke. So we kind of jump between past timeline and present timeline. You just get fully immersed in the story. It really feels like you're there with her reliving these scenes, and then it will kind of be like briefly interrupted by a present day discussion or responses from the girls as they're hearing the story. Now, one thing about this book is that it actually takes place like in 2020 within the pandemic. The girls go back to where they grew up and are kind of like quarantining with their parents as COVID is kind of like disrupting the world. However, I didn't feel like it was too much discussion on COVID or anything like that, so like I wouldn't be worried about it. Just know like that is where the present day setting takes place. I feel like in 50 years this book is going to be a classic. Our kids or my grandchildren could be reading about because it talks about a lot of taboo topics in a very digestible way. It tackled topics like mental illness, like abortion, like emotionally abusive relationship, like age gaps, older men taking advantage of girls under 18, how young actresses can get taken advantage of. There's a lot of topics that are discussed in here. It does kind of show how kids think that they know everything about their parents, when actually there's a lot that they don't know. And then some things that they'll never know about their parents because their parents are never going to choose to tell them certain stories. I absolutely love this. Now, I do think it might have gone a bit slower if I was just reading the book. I would highly recommend the audiobook because Meryl Streep is Meryl Streep. I mean, she can do no wrong. I wrote down that I only gave this 4.5 stars. I'm gonna think on that. I do think this book is between a 4.5 to a 5 stars. I think the only thing that would take it away from being a 5 stars is that there were parts that drag. The themes that were touched on and like how I left the book feeling. If this is a 4.5, I mean, this is an extremely strong 4.5, possibly even a 4.75 with how good and impactful this story really was. I would recommend it to anyone, and that is Tom Lake. Okay, so that is our monthly wrap up. Very happy I got through some of these and that I read so many physical. And I feel like next month is going to be just as good, if not better. I have a lot of books on my TBR that I'm excited to get to, so expect my May TBR video after this. Expect a moving vlog as well coming up. But for now, I will love you and leave you. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon.